Really happy to introduce Dr. Helena Mitasova. Helena is a professor in the Department of Marine Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. She's also Associate Director and Faculty Fellow at NC State's Center for Geospatial Analytics. She received her MS and PhD degrees from Slovak Technical University in Bratislava, which is, we were just talking about this prior to starting the seminar. It's on the Danube River, basically on the border between Hungary and Austria, and just a really beautiful part of the country. Helena has a very impressive list of publications, of grants, and I think what speaks to her sort of interdisciplinary nature and also her standing in this field. She's a member of the Open Source Geospatial Foundation Board of Directors and a member of the Open Source GIS Software Project Steering Committee. She's a member of the IS Blue International Scientific Council on Interdisciplinary Graduate School for the Blue Planet in Brest, France, and has been instrumental in developing the geospatial information programs at NC State, as well as the Geospatial Analytics program. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Helena.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present some of our work that we have done on the coast together with our team, Geo4All Laboratory at the Center for Geospatial Analytics. And let me first introduce the Center for Geospatial Analytics for those who are not familiar with it. It is a center that is housed at the College of Natural Resources, but its education and research spans entire NC State through our cluster and faculty fellows program. And our research and education is focused on Earth observation, modeling, visualization of landscape processes, and also on collaborative decision support. We offer several degree programs. The newest is the PhD in Geospatial Analytics. Then for over 10 years, we have offered professional masters in geospatial science and technology, as well as graduate GIS certificate. And in all of these programs, we have students who are doing coastal research, either from engineering or from MEAS. So the research in the CGA, in the center, is really built around the theme of harnessing data for decision making. And as you can see, although these topics are rather general, all of them apply in some way to coastal sustainability and resilience. So we have projects that focus on mapping a dynamic planet, and I will show some of these examples of these mapping tools and efforts. Then we also have several groups developing tools for forecasting landscape and environmental change, and all of this is done to support decision analytics. And then we also develop tools that support engaging communities with participatory modeling and participatory research. And one of the tools that we have, that some of you might have seen, that we used in this participatory modeling is the tangible landscape. And I will show it as well in my talk. And all of these tools are developed as open source geospatial software, so it's free and accessible to everybody. And we incorporate the open source software both in our education and in our research. So let me start looking at the dynamic barrier islands topography. So this is as I mentioned, we have one of the topics of the research at the center is mapping the dynamic planet. And one of the most dynamic places on the planet are barrier islands. And As you all probably know, this landscape is continuously modified by nature and humans, and you can see my examples there. Pretty big efforts to modify the topography to essentially support coastal resilience and sustainability. And of course, there is a question like, what is the best approach? But this is what's happening right now and over the past decades. And of course, if we want to support adaptive management that essentially reacts to the natural modifications of these dynamic barrier islands, we need to have good data and the data that are up to date. And that is, of course, very challenging in this very dynamic environment. So I would like to use Jockey's Ridge Park as one of the examples of these challenges in managing dynamic environment. So as you can see on this image, we have a dynamic dune. We have a topography that is changing all the time, and it's all locked into fixed state park boundaries. And that is actually true along the entire Outer Banks, where we have fixed boundaries, but we have a very dynamic, continuously changing landscape. So how can we sustainably support such landscape and people essentially functioning in this landscape, where we have this conflict between the static features and static boundaries and continuously moving landscape? So there are efforts to stabilize the landscape, and that has been there for a long time. For this particular example, one of the efforts that has been implemented for stabilization of Jockey's Ridge was, for example, these fences, and Christmas trees were put there as well. But it didn't help too much because the dune has just overblown all of these fences. And what was really even worse, the dune was losing the beautiful natural shape when these fences were put in. And they didn't stop the dune. So to actually try to find some more sustainable way how to manage this highly dynamic system, it was really important to understand what's happening and how the dune system is evolving. And I was very fortunate to work with Marjorie Overton on this project, where she has collected some data from that were derived from photogrammetry, some older data from 74, 95, and 98. And then starting in 99, we had the LiDAR data available. So we were able to build a time series of digital elevation models and then derive the information, the quantitative information about how this dune is evolving. And we have more recently, we were able to augment the time series from LiDAR data, which are generally pretty difficult to get, and they are quite expensive to acquire. And so we rely on these wide mappings that are done by Corps of Engineers or NOAA or NC State, but we were able to add additional data using the drones. So that's another way how this monitoring can be further enhanced. So you can see that we are getting much more data now, but we have these big gaps of data in the past. So using all these data sets, we were able to create a three-dimensional model of dune evolution since 1974. And we also were able to derive different metrics that actually describes quantitatively how this dune moves. So you can see that it is moving towards the south. We were able to measure the rate of migration, which is for these lower dunes, for the eastern dune, 6 meters per year. So that's quite a bit of movement. And then for the bigger dune, it's about 3 meters per year. But we also noticed the landform transformation. So when you watch it at the very beginning in 1974, the dune was a crescenting, huge dune with well-defined peak. And over the time, it has changed to sand-starved, fast-moving parabolic dunes that are much lower and are much more essentially dispersed and spread. And I have included here a link to the web page where you can browse the time series, so you can see how it looked like at different time snapshots. And we have there a snapshot after Hurricane Matthews, which was from the drone, and that's the DEM that has those ripples on over it. So as I mentioned, with the digital data, we were able to do all kinds of quantitative analysis. So we were able to do differences between digital elevation models over time and look at the pattern of the change. So what was a little bit surprising was that actually the pattern didn't change since at least 1974. So we have loss of elevation on the windward side, huge gains in elevation on the leeway side of the dune as the dune is essentially migrating. But there was also gain in elevation towards the east. So the dune is moving not only to the south, but also to the east. And we were also able to compute the total sand volume. There were a lot of concerns that the dune system is losing sand and that the sand is being blown into the sounds. But we have found that the sand volume was actually pretty stable over time at 3.5 million cubic meters. So here is another view of how the dune has changed. The orange surface that you can see here, that's the dune in 1974. So you can see that tall peak that was very well defined. And the yellow surface is the surface in 2017. And you can see that this dune has almost completely relocated. And it really was getting to these are homes, to the homes and to the boundary of the park. So this is just a cross section. That cross section is done somewhere here. And you can see again where the dune was losing the sand and where it was gaining sand. And this is essentially the process, how it is migrating. We have also, when we were just wondering why it is, why the dune is migrating this way, why it has changed its shape so dramatically, and also it was losing elevation, as you might have seen. What we have started to look at the land cover, and that was the work done by Katie Weaver. So we looked at the land cover in 1945, and what we have found, most of this area was sandy. And especially look at this area, that area was just completely sand. And even this that looks like it's green, it was very sandy, just some grass is in that location. So 74% was vegetated. Now we move on to 1974. We see much more development along the beaches, and we also see substantial increase of vegetation. So the vegetation is now at 31%. And moving forward in 2009, the vegetation is literally exploding in that area. And so it is now only 46% sand, 42% vegetated, and especially the area from where the sand was blown onto the dune is now covered by, is forested essentially. And also we see the forest forming in front of the dune. And then in many of these areas, the vegetation is being replaced by development. And because we don't see it as much here because it is within the park. So we don't have any development within the park, but outside the park, essentially the vegetation is replaced by development. And we can see this pattern all over the barrier islands. But the real big surprise came when we looked at the peak elevation change. So as I mentioned, in 74, that was the year, the dune had very well-defined peak, which stood at 33 meters. But there were some older maps, and there was especially topographic map from 1953, which was based on data from 1949, that has shown the dune at 42 meters. So it was even taller before the park was established. And the park was established in 1974. And now it is even less than 21 meters. And you can see how that peak elevation essentially was losing the height that it had. And again, like, it was quite surprising that it was, the loss of elevation was really linear over the time. So no dramatic changes in the processes. It just kept doing what it was doing since at least 40s. We have seen a little bit of stabilization around 2005, but then again, it started to go down. But we were really curious to see whether the dune was even taller than 42 meters. So Marjorie was absolutely amazing, digging out different data, you know, surveys reports and different historical maps. And we were just trying to find more information about the height of the dune. And there was very limited because there were just symbols, like there are dunes, that's it. But we have found a topographic map from 1917, which had some spot elevations, and then a profile from 1930s. And that the big surprise was that the dune was actually going back much lower than what it was in 40s. So in 1917, it was the tallest point that we could find that was measured in that area was actually 20 meters. And that's what the dune is now about. That's the height of the current dune. Then apparently it was during this period of time, it was growing. And so in 1930s, the profiles show already 32-meter elevation, and then it peaked, at least the data show that it peaked at 42 meters. It might have been higher in between, but what it essentially shows that the tall dune was a transient feature. So it wasn't some feature that was there for hundreds of years, but it lasted only a couple decades. So what it essentially tells us that this is a dynamic, living, evolving landscape. So, the idea about preserving a tall dune is probably not the way how we should think about resilience and sustainability. And we were able to actually find some old postcards, and I have found the old postcards really useful for explaining some of the historical data where we have very limited information. So you can see here in the middle, this is how the dune looked like in 1950. That's when it was the tallest, according to the data that we have. And then there is a book about Nag's Head, which has this postcard from 1917. And you can see that the shape is just so similar to the shape that we have right now. And of course, we don't know from where this picture was taken, so we can't really directly compare it, but we know that it was in the dunes in Nags Head, so probably at least somewhere close where the current Jockey's Ridge is. And there are other old photographs that explain some of the processes that were going on. So, for example, this is a photo from Wright brothers, taken by Wright brothers around that area in 1907. And you can see these moving dunes. As they were migrating, they were overtaking the vegetation in front of them, and they were actually at that time considered a very destructive feature. And this is 2015, the dunes still doing the same thing. Again, it's also although we have a lot of trees now there, the dune still manages to overtake some of that vegetation. But in the on the windward, on the northern side of the dune, the vegetation is really taking over. And the real insight came from a geological study that was one of the projects that was funded by the park that looked inside the dune. So that was a project that was led by Dr. Hubholm, and there were many people participating in this project. They took course in the and they also did the ground penetrating radar. And what they found 2 layers of soil, and they were able to date them. And essentially, what they have shown that the dune system was changing from active sand dunes to a stable forested area. Then again, another layer of indicating active sand dunes, another layer of soil indicating a stable vegetated area. And now we are essentially at the time where we are seeing still active sand dunes, but we are also seeing a lot of increase in that in the forest within the park. So again, we are seeing at a different time scale a very dynamic, evolving, living landscape that changes between vastly different ecosystems. So keeping that in mind, we have also people who come there to enjoy the fantastic and amazing landscape that these dunes represent. And there was a lot of discussions because there can be 1 million people coming there within a year. So it is one of the most visited parks in North Carolina. So there was a lot of concern that maybe people are causing the loss of elevation at the dune. But as we have shown, the dune was losing elevation even before the park was established. And you might have seen that between the 42 or 49 and 74, there was a lot of loss of elevation. So we didn't really see, or we didn't have data that would indicate the impact of people visiting the dune having impact on the loss of elevation or change in the shape of the dune. All of that happened during the time, was already happening during the time when there were very few people. And what we would love to explore is to look at the 1962, I think it's the Ash Wednesday storm, which was a huge storm. It actually breached the barrier island in this location. And we have aerial photos that could be, now there are tools to derive the 3D models from those photos. And we may be able to reconstruct how it looked like post 1962, whether that was the time when it switched from that growing dune into the dune that was losing elevation. And this study that was looking at the visitors' impact also did a survey of 200 visitors during the summer and fall in 2005. And there were many interesting insights from that visitor survey. But one of the important insights was that people welcomed the change. So there was no concern that the dune is changing. There was concern that people will come with bulldozers and change the dune. So the dune was, the change was perceived as valuable or a positive if it was natural. But there were bulldozers needed anyway. Because so what are these now implications for the dune management? And when you think about it, the ideal solution would be to expand the boundaries of the park so that the dune can continue evolve naturally. But that was out of the question. There were already homes there. Nobody would give up the homes. There was the important, like a connection to the sound side. So expanding the boundaries of the park was not feasible. So the researchers actually who did the geological study suggested that the sand that is leaving the park on the south side, and especially like this, there was this small dune that was right on the edge and that was getting on the road all the time. They suggested that the sand from there is relocated to the windward side of the dune and that potentially it will feed the dune. So essentially the idea was to keep the sand within the system, don't let it starve. So have that sand, keep the sand there. So that happened in 2003. And then more recently in 2019, where this dune has reached the park boundary, again, a similar amount was relocated to this windward side of the dune to keep the sand within the system. And they also used some of that sand to nourish this little beach that's on the sound side. So we were excited to look at the data to see whether there will be any indication that this helped and that it kept the dune tall. You have seen that after 2003, the dune still was losing elevation. But what we have, because the place where they put it, it's very rough and it has shrubs around it. So the vegetation was really preventing for that sand getting directly to the dune, but it was possible, it still got indirectly to the dune, and actually this middle dune started to be taller than the main dune. So there was some effect, and what we can say that the idea of management of Jockey's Reach as a living landscape and support it as a living landscape was successful. The dune is still there, and especially what was preserved, the processes that form the dune and that create these beautiful shapes were preserved. So this is one of the examples that address and illustrate how we can address the sustainability and resilience of the landscape features on the barrier islands. But we have bigger problems on the barrier islands, and this is actually the title from CNN from February 9, 2022, about homes collapsing into the ocean. There was another news item in WRAL just yesterday about Rodanti and about how homes falling into the ocean in Rodanti. So the barrier islands themselves, and especially the beaches and foredunes, are also very dynamic and highly impacted. So we don't move the sand around, only the sand around, we also move the structures around when there is not enough sand. And this is the famous house from the movie Nights in Rodante that essentially ended up in the surf in 2009, and it was then moved in January 2010. And of course, if we want to address all these problems and try to find some management solutions, we need good data. And because it's so dynamic, the data need to, essentially these areas need to be continuously mapped and continuously monitored because they change so much. And in North Carolina, we are fortunate that we have LiDAR data on the coast starting 1996. The issue with the data is that they are quite scattered in space and time. So most of the data cover beach and foredune, but there is much less data further inland or on the sound side of the dunes. So there is like this gap in our understanding what the dynamics is there. But the data have very high resolution and accuracy, which is very important on the coast. We have very flat topography, so you can say like every foot matters a lot. And another really important thing about the LiDAR data is that allows us to map not only bare ground, not only sandy areas, but also the properties and full three-dimensional structure of vegetation and also the buildings. And we can supplement this data with drones nowadays. So we have developed a coastal dynamic toolbox that can take this time series of LiDAR elevation data and extract all kinds of useful information from this time series that essentially provides a quantitative measures of the dynamics of these systems. And this project was funded by NCC grant quite a few years ago. And we have put all of these methods together in a book that was published in 2014. So it has all the techniques that you can use to analyze time series of coastal digital elevation models and extract different metrics. So I will just show one of those metrics that we have used that has proven to be very useful. And that's what we call core surface. So if we take the entire time series of these digital elevation models, then we can extract the minimum elevation that was ever measured at each grid cell. And we can also extract the maximum elevation at each grid cell. And we call the minimum elevation will create this abstract surface that we call core. And this core is essentially a surface that indicates, that shows that's the volume of sand that has never moved. That's the stable part of that barrier island system. And then if we extract the shoreline from the core surface and the envelope surface, we will get a shoreline fluctuation band. So again, that will tell us how the shoreline has fluctuated over that given period. So let's look at how does that work? So this is a cross section actually somewhere around Rodante, and you can see this is that red surface. That's the elevation below which the elevations never decreased under this surface, and the gray profile, that's the actual elevation surface that was there. And you can see it's not going only back like inland, but it goes back and forth based on whether there were some storms. After big storms, we have some recovery period. There were also nourishment periods. So that's why the core is really important, because it tells us this is what was stable. And you can then, for example, look at whether the home was built on an area that has core or on an area that actually has moved sometimes during the time period that you are studying. And here is the example for that shoreline band, the fluctuation of that of the shoreline. Again, the moving shoreline is the actual shoreline, and this would be that boundary within which that shoreline has actually moved. And the blue homes are the newly built homes, and the red homes are the homes that are lost. And this is what is really important about this fluctuation band is that it can be much higher than the long-term erosion rate, because it really includes this, the recovery processes, the impact of the storms, and also the human interventions, such as the nourishment. And this is actually the area that is eroding at 13 feet per year. So you have like a pretty serious erosion there. It has eroded over 60 meters over the past 10 years. So really, and that's the area that the news was talking about in Rodante. Another useful metrics that we can get that is essentially related to these very high erosion rates is the change in structures. So we can extract, just by running 2 or 3 commands, extract the homes that were lost. Those are these red homes, and the homes that were built. And you can see how they are rebuilt with some bigger setback from the shoreline. So we can look at these structures and take, let's say, 20 years of digital elevation models and map the change in structures, and essentially how the people were addressing the resilience and sustainability in this area. We can also use these high resolution digital elevation models to find the vulnerable areas that may be missed by the models, by the big process-based models that predict, for example, hurricane impacts or the sea level rise, because those are usually at a much lower resolution. This is 1 meter resolution DEM, and it can capture the impact of the beach access, which is usually just a few meters wide. And you can see this is, I think, post-Sandy or one of those big storms. Again, all of these beach access areas, they are eroded. This is that area in Rodante, how it looks like. This is a post-Irene simulation based on the observed wreck line. So we have the wreck line tells us where essentially what was the elevation of water at that time. And then we can simulate what was underwater and what was out of water. And you can see these are the homes that are in the surf. And this is actually a video that somebody took at that time, at the time of that storm. So now, how do we communicate these processes, and how do we work with people to help them to understand what's going on and how they can address some of these issues? And to make the collaborative research and education and collaborative engagement easier and even more fun for people, we have developed the system that we call Tangible Landscape. And what it does, it uses Kinect scanner. It continuously scans a 3-dimensional model of a landscape. Then the data are imported into GrassGIS. Then we run some models or simulation. In this case, it's surface water, and it's also ponding of water in depressions. Let me run it again. And then the results of that simulation are projected back onto that model. So people can move around to the sand, modify the model, and they will get a feedback on how that modification impacted the processes. And the lead developer is Anna Petrashova in our lab, and together with Brendan Harmon and Payam Tabrizian and other students, they have done incredible work expanding the capabilities of the system. So now you can not only change the topography, but you can plant the different types of plants on the surface, and then that's rendered in a three-dimensional environment. So you can step onto the landscape and look at how it looks like from the ground. You can put on the glasses and essentially step into it and see it in virtual reality. And there are many different types of interactions that we can do using using markers, using patches. Most recently, what Anna has implemented is simulation steering to support adaptive management. So you can essentially change for example, the measures or mitigation measures during the simulation when you see that the things are not going well. So you can modify them, and that's essentially adaptive management. And from the example, she has done it for pathogen spread, and it was amazing what a big difference the adaptive management made in terms of its effectiveness. So we have built also some coastal applications for tangible landscape. This is the application for Bald Head Island, where we looked at how the breaches in Fordune would impact flooding on the Bald Head Island. And this is actually, we did this before Florence. And as you probably know, Florence has really landed very close to Bald Head Island, and there are really breaches again through these beach access locations. So we have, as I mentioned, like before Florence hit, we have developed this as a serious game, very simple game, where we give people a little bit of sand, not enough to build a huge Fordune, and we ask them to find some solutions to prevent a random breaching. So people do all kinds of scenarios in terms of how to protect the homes, and then based on what they do, then we randomly breach the Fordune and give them how many homes were actually flooded and how many homes they were able to save. And this was an interesting solution where they didn't try to build the Fordune because that doesn't work, you don't have enough sand, but they built a dune across, so only part of the homes were flooded, not the entire area. And we have seen people digging channels and all kinds of things. And that actually shows you how people can use this system to generate new ideas and collaborate essentially on addressing the issues and the challenges of sustainability in these areas. And we got a small grant from NC State to build to provide a system from Bald Head Island Conservancy. So we have built two systems. One has the game, and the another one is on display at Bald Head Island Conservancy, and it shows how the shorelines have moved over time. And there is, like, in 1850. The shoreline was somewhere here. So it would take, like, if it went back to that, it would take the entire golf course out. So there was a lot of dynamic, and actually these small islands, they tend to rotate. So this is an example of an application where you can educate people about how dynamic these areas are, and also provide them with opportunity to understand how the processes like storm surge would work, and how important it is to not only protect yourself in front of your home, but if your neighbor just leaves there an opening in the dune, you will be affected as well. And there are many different applications for the tangible landscape, not only the modules or processes that are related to water. There is, for example, fire simulation. There is solar energy simulation, where you can, move around the homes and see where there will be cast shadows or how much solar energy they will have. We have an application where you can dig into subsurface and to map, for example, to look at how the soil moisture is distributed, or you can plan different trails and optimize those trails. And we also have taken it out to the community and have kids just play around with it and watch the changes. And there is more on the website that we have. So let me just finish with some ideas about the future of coastal resilience and sustainability research. And I will just focus on a geospatial data component. So what we really see that we have a new period or next generation mapping and monitoring, because in addition to LiDAR, which is now a traditional method, we have a lot of new data that are collected using autonomous systems, microsatellite imagery, and we also have citizen science, which I didn't put here, but it's an important component of collecting data. But what we really need is we need to overcome fragmented data collection, because what we went through a lot of frustration that there is no long-term systematic program for collecting even the elevation data at the temporal resolution that is needed in these dynamic environments. And then once we have the data, we need an automated system that would update the derived data layers like shoreline erosion, sea level rise predictions. Those at NOAA, they are based on maybe 10-year-old data, and everything has changed since then. And as I mentioned, it can be frustrating to find all the data. That's why the really important thing would be to have a coastal research data hub that would capture not only the data collected by big projects, but there is also a lot of small projects that are collecting different data sets. And they need to be captured, and we need them in a single space, in a database that can be accessed maybe from the same portal. And I'm sure that there are people working on this, but it's really important. So I think that will be something in the future that we will see. And we will also see that the data are fair. So that means they are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. They follow these principles. There is a very strong push when you are collecting data to make sure that they are fair. And as we talked before, it's really important to understand human component. We may have all the science, but if we don't understand how people work with this information that we are able to provide, then that science will not be as useful for the coastal resilience and for sustainable management. And what I have seen I'm not social scientist, but working with social scientists, there are many new tools and new technologies where we can collect the data about human behavior, and we can understand much better by engaging the communities what the attitudes are, what are the important components of the human decision making in these areas, including the role of emotions. If you have done any research on the coast, people are very emotional about the coastal landscape and coastal areas. So that is all that I have, and thank you for listening. And I will be happy to take questions.
Great, thank you.
This is Cape Hatteras.
Thank you very much. A little round of applause for Helena. That was fascinating. The tangible landscapes is just so cool in terms of being able to look at different adaptive management approaches and responses. So we have a little time for questions. So please raise your hand or put your question in the chat. Paul?
Yeah, Helena, thank you very much. This is a fantastic talk. And I think the great potential for the application of your technology, particularly for now, the coastal resilience. So my question is, now we can, based on the tool and your presentation, now we understand how dynamic the shoreline, even the dune, the beach change. But is anybody working together try to understand the driving force, like the dynamic, particularly from the current, from the the underwater portion?
Yes, actually, the group at the civil engineering, I don't know whether we have anybody here, whether we have Casey, Dietrich here. Their group is actually working with the models like XBeach and Delft 3D models to understand what is moving, all the forces that are moving the sand. Yeah. And there is one issue that when I was talking about the need for data, that we don't really have good data on bathymetry. Some of the bathymetry data are like 100 years old, actually, on the sound side. But so the models are restricted to what data we actually have. But they definitely run the models and that connect the forces, wave forces, current forces, storm forces, to the change of shoreline and the change of the foredunes. Yes, yeah. And it's a very strong research component in the coastal group of our civil engineering.
Okay, at the same time, I want to know, here we also have the Delft 3D modeling, and we can pick up a site to test. We can do that kind of sediment dynamic modeling with your result to see how the morphology or configuration change. And the second thing I want to see, I'm also working on the INSA data. The INSA remote sensing data provide every 12 days, like 2 weeks.
Yes.
The upper grade. Those could be a fantastic data source to combine with your tangible model. But now the challenge is the INSA processing still manually, is not robotic. So if we can try to figure out a script automatic processing, every 12 days, we give an update of North Carolina coastal morphology, shoreline dynamic. That will be a great gateway or data set. Portal.
Yes, yeah, that's a really good suggestion. And another one that I think I had here was this microsatellite imagery, like planets, that essentially map each area on Earth every day. And there are efforts now to use because there is overlapping imagery, you can use the photogrammetry to essentially generate three-dimensional models from those. So there are efforts into this as well. So that's why I was saying, like, that's a next generation mapping and monitoring that we see, and should help with the adaptive management. We can react much faster than what we had before. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Amanda, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Sure, if no one else has one. Just a fun kind of anecdotal as well. I used to go as a child to Jockey's Ridge every summer from 1980 to 96. And we'd go in the fall too. We'd go twice a year. And then I had not been for over 20 years and just went back last year. And I can truly attest to those dune migrations and the form shape difference. I was shocked that it was not the same dunes I had experienced in the past. But yes. So I did have a question for the tangible landscapes. I work with our Climate Leaders program on campus, working with students and helping them look at kind of climate change situations in different ways. And so that tangible landscape seems like a wonderful hand-on tool to work in that type of setting. And I'm just curious if that is something that's available for us at NC State to kind of tap into and use. And as part of a follow-up with that is when you run one of those simulations for making changes, is that an instantaneous return or is it a delayed process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's instantaneous, it's in real time, depending on the complexity of the model, but we try to make it real time. And it absolutely is available. And we have set up like a service center that provides these systems, and we help it set up on the campus. So we have like College of Designs have a couple of them, College of Education also has one. So they are installed in different places on the campus as well. And we had a GAPS program for high school, after school program here in Raleigh. So we have implemented it there as well. And we have designed different like custom tasks for the students. So we have a lot of experience with that, and we would be very happy to work with you to get it to the students.
Wonderful, thank you. I will be reaching out to you for sure to start those discussions.
Yes, that's great.
Great. Well, thanks again, Helena. And I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. I think there's a lot of interest in these the application to tangible landscapes. So again, thanks everybody. Please plan to join us next Friday. That will be our last seminar for the semester. And let's give Helena one more round of applause. So thank you very much, Helena.